This is the combined chapters of 7 and 9. Chapter is called The Industrial Revolution. This is discussion number 1. Great Britain innovates the Industrial Revolution. This chapter is going to be dealing with the Industrial Revolution. One of the most basic ideas of the Industrial Revolution is that with the use of tools and the mechanization of tools, the productivity of the worker was dramatically increased. With that dramatic increase, it was able to, first of all, sustain larger populations and create a better standard of living for those living during the Industrial Revolution. Now, if we go back and compare the Industrial Revolution to what we see today, then yeah, life was not that great. But one thing that we have to remember is that life had been improving, and now life continues to improve. So, the Industrial Revolution, like I said, is highly developed on the idea of use of new mechanized tools. First, we're going to start with agriculture because, as with most population explosions, it comes through the more productive farmer, and because that's how we feed all of our extra people. So, the inventions that allowed the higher productivity allowed more food, more wealth, more population. However, with the more of the larger productivity, meant that a lot of small-time farmers who couldn't quite keep up with the curve were essentially squeezed out of being able to continue their existence as a farmer. They lost their farms to some of the more wealthy individuals and the ones who maybe saw a little bit more business sense in what was going on. However, some other negative results is that there was a lot of exploitation of these farmers who then had to go to the cities and were so desperate to have something to do in order to support their families that they were willing to subject themselves to extreme circumstances that was not going to work out in their favor. A couple of people we want to call attention to that brought about some very important movements in the idea of agriculture. Charles Townshend, who was a farmer of turnips in Great Britain, developed the concept of crop rotation. Crop rotation is very important because it allows a farmer to make sure that the ground that they're planting is going to be rich in nutrients by changing what they plant there on a yearly basis. And that there are specific plants that you put into a field that help replenish the nutrients that are otherwise taken by some of the more popular um, agricultural products. Another guy, Jethro Tull, developed the seed drill. There's a little picture of that on slide 1. And what this essentially did was created opportunities for farmers to, instead of just going out in the field and throwing out seed and stuff would come up, a very detailed, very organized way, and therefore much more efficient way in order to plant the crops for the season. Now, the inventions allowed not only greater agriculture, but also much more reliable energy. Remember up until this point that the energy that's used for any productivity is either going to be falling water over a water wheel or wind. And it's not always going to blow, and what happens if the water no longer is running? The invention of the steam engine and then later the internal combustion engine meant that energy would be available to move machines at any time. Steam engine was developed by a guy by the name of James Watt. Um, Iron was being used and made of better quality in order to help the idea of the steam engine creating a railroad in order to get items from one area of the country to another. And Great Britain is going to be the pioneer in a lot of these industrial movements. Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which was developed in the United States, dramatically increased the speed of cotton production. And so, as cotton was becoming less and less and less expensive because it was a lot easier and a lot more efficient to produce it, is that factories were developed in order to keep up with the cotton, and the textile industry really took off during during the early Industrial Revolution. Now, with all of the new equipment and all these new machines, meant that a lot more money was necessary to actually get started. fabric from ancient time, everybody had their own loom that was going to make their fabric, and they did it themselves and didn't take up a whole bunch of room in the house. But if you're going to be doing large uh, quantities of fabric or large quantities of whatever you're going to produce, it's going to take a lot of startup cash. So what would happen is that these raw materials would show up in a country, and then they would be altered in a way that be usable. Now, it first started out where all these extra raw materials would be sent to people's homes, and the housewives would then, in their times during the day, essentially work on it at their own pace, and then a week later, or whatever the schedule was, that someone would come by and pick up their finished materials and then give them some more raw materials, and then that would be the manufacturing process. However, as the quantities increased and as people were developing machines that were able to deal with large quantities, is that you couldn't put these machines in your house. And so they would build these factories, buildings to house these large machines, and then they tell people, if you're going to work for us, we can't do it at your home. You're going to have to come to where the machine is and work. Some of the really large textile machines, such as the flying shuttle and the spinning jenny, were machines that were developed for the production of textiles that really put the cottage industry out of business. Not the person working with the spinning wheel and the loom, that was pretty much passe. We were going full bore in the amount of productivity. Now, we mentioned Great Britain very briefly. Great Britain is considered to be the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And for several different reasons, they had a lot of the ingredients that helped them be first. First of all, remember, colonies were producing raw materials. Great Britain has the most colonies of all the European powers. Even after losing the North American colonies, which we now call the United States, they were still trading with the Americas. And plus, they had India and all those other colonies throughout the world. And so they had natural shipping as well, because obviously their navy is the biggest thing on planet Earth at this point. On top of that, they had large coal deposits. They had a lot of running water for those water wheels that we had talked about. So they had lots of opportunity for energy to be used in order to make the machines go. And lots of streams, rivers, they dug canals, and it's not a very wide country. They're not very far from an ocean, no matter where you are in the British Isles. And so being able to get things in and out of the country and between factories was very easy as compared to maybe a Russia or a Germany or things of that. And so they had a lot of benefits or natural circumstances that helped them be an industrial giant. This concludes discussion number 1, Great Britain Innovates the Industrial Revolution, as a part of the combined chapters of 7 and 9, The Industrial Revolution.